All right, guys, I'm going to gavel us in here. I'm going to call to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm the chair of this committee. And I'm joined today by Council members Quincy, Fry, Cano, Council President Johnson, and Council member Andrew Johnson. And we are a full complement of the committee. We have several items on the agenda, and I just am looking because our first two items have to do with proposed charter amendments, and I see Mr. Casey Carl is here, but I'm not seeing our city attorney here. And there is our city attorney. Okay, we are watching you walk in. So I think that we will go ahead then in order. I was going to say if the city attorney isn't here, we might delay these items. But since the city attorney is here, I think we can move forward with our items in the order of the proposed agenda. So again, our first two items have to do with proposed charter amendments. And Mr. Carl, were you intending to be the presenter or Ms. Siegel? I think Mr. Carl. So if you're able to kick us off and describe the first item. The first item has to do with what is called the sale of wine and beer in certain establishments. And some of us know this as 70-30 food alcohol ratios.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, Casey Carl from the clerk's office. Before you is a proposed amendment to the city charter forwarded from the Charter Commission dealing with licensing regulations that deal with wine and beer within the city limits. The Charter Commission has recommended this amendment be submitted to the electorate as part of the general election in November. The wording that has been drafted by the city attorney's office in response to the Charter Commission submission is before you. The duty of the IGR committee, the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, of course, is to consider that language, make the determination what that final language would be, and forward the recommendation to City Council.
So I wonder if I think I would ask you to go ahead and please read the proposed language to us, and so the public can hear that as well. And as I understand it, the city attorney's office has a mandate to try to word the question in the way, not to advocate for one position or another. And there are some other requirements or standards that are state law imposed on how the question is worded.
Certainly, Madam Chair. The city attorney's proposed language would be titled, Remove Mandatory Food to Wine or Beer Percentages. The question, shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to remove the mandatory food to wine or beer, 70% to 30%, gross sales percentage for wine licenses for restaurants, and to remove the requirements that businesses holding liquor licenses in certain areas of the city must serve a meal with every order of wine or beer. For passage, of course, this question is subject to state statute requirement that 55% of those who vote on the question are required to vote in the affirmative in order for that question to be adopted at the ballot.
Okay. Is there any discussion on this language? And just to refresh folks, unlike other things that have to do with changing the charter at this point, our decision is really just a majority vote on the proposed language of the question. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question for my colleagues, and just throwing it out there, I would wonder if, since it does seem maybe it might sound a little technical, gross sales percentage for wine and licenses, maybe potentially moving the latter part of the question ahead of the former so that it would be worded to ask about removing the requirement that businesses holding liquor licenses in certain areas of the city must serve a meal with every order, and remove the mandatory food to wine or beer 70-30 gross sales percent for wine licenses for restaurants. So I'm just throwing that out there, not making a motion, but just throwing it out for discussion if it might make sense to flip those two around so that it leads in a little more with the idea of kind of the restrictions.
And maybe you want to just say again what's your thought on why that's preferable?
And why that's preferable, I would say, potentially is that reading this, it's, working with this concept, I understand it. I think a lot of folks who have been keeping up with this understand it. If within the first third of the paragraph you're seeing this, remove the mandatory food to wine or beer 70 to 30 gross sales percentage, I could potentially see some people's eyes glazing over and maybe not wanting to really tackle the question. Whereas if they are first posed with removing the requirement that businesses holding liquor licenses in certain areas of the city must serve a meal with every order of wine or beer, then they get to that a little bit more technical aspect of the question around the percentages towards the end of it. So by that way, they're still kind of with it and they understand, this is around the different restrictions over serving food with alcohol, if that makes sense. It's a very technical
No, thank you.
question.
And I didn't mean to quiz you. This is kind of one of these, and we have some folks joining us who are help us with our federal agenda. And so I say this is the nuts and bolts of city work here. This is a difficult one. I have to admit I hadn't thought about that wording per se. I agree with you, Councilmember Johnson. This is kind of one of these items that feels fairly technical frankly, probably like a lot of our charter changes feels technical as you are reading the question. And, just in all honesty, will depend a little bit on the education that someone is able to glean before they see this. The other thing that's a little complicated about this is that we still have ordinances that control things like food to alcohol ratios and other mechanisms for regulating restaurants. And this question ends up being not stated like this, but the question ends up being a little bit for the voter. Is this the right thing to have in the charter? Or should we have this kind of regulation, and whether we modify it or not more a question in our ordinance system? Honestly, I guess I would probably lean towards just keeping the question as it is, maybe more so because I haven't thought very much about changing it around and what would be the implication of seeing it that way, but others may feel differently. Any other comment from council members? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a problem really at all with this switching the question around. I mean, it seems to still serve the same end goal. I hate to put our attorneys on the spot, but do we see any issues with switching that language around?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Fry, I don't see any big issues. It is a different order than it appears in the charter.
Okay.
Because first, the first thing in this subsection 2 deals with the 70-30, and then subsection 3 deals with on-site consumption in certain areas smaller than 7 acres in size. I did connect eyes with Mr. Clegg, the chair of our charter commission, to see if he, off the top of his head, had an opinion one way or the other, and he appears to be agnostic.
I'm going to ask one more question, which is just a reminder to myself about whether we have any flexibility to hold this in committee a cycle to consider, or whether the recommendation is we should just vote right now, pick this up or down, and move it forward to the full council. I know there's important timing issues to this.
Madam Chair, the municipal clerk is required by law to submit ballot questions to the county by August 22nd, and I recall that we have one more council cycle in which we could act on this. So this is now teed up to be considered by the full council on August 1st, but we would have one additional cycle in between and could act by the 15th within that statutory deadline before the 22nd.
Okay. What I might recommend to my colleagues then is, just because I feel like I would like to see it written out in the alternative language, and that might be preferable, to just making a decision right here. It's not that I'm opposed to the suggestion, but if we do have the opportunity to hold it one cycle, I think I would recommend that we do that then, and then review the recommendation of Councilmember Andrew Johnson. If that is acceptable to colleagues, I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds great, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. And then just confirming we do have that flexibility. So I'll just move then that we are going to postpone this in committee one cycle, and we will ask the city attorney's office to prepare a proposed alternative that would utilize the same language, but essentially switch the clauses as described by Councilmember Andrew Johnson, so we can see that alternative and consider it at our next meeting. Okay, so all in approval of that motion to postpone one cycle, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that then is approved. Next, we have another item that is about proposed changes to our charter. Mr. Carl.
Madam Chair, the second item on the committee's agenda has to do with municipal filing fees. This subject has been discussed frequently between the council and the Charter Commission. Recently, the Charter Commission considered this question again, and on July 3rd did submit their recommendation as a ballot question to be submitted to the electorate in November. The question of municipal filing fees. That question is before you in your briefing materials. As the chair had requested previously, I'll read this one for the public. It's titled Filing Fee for City Elected Offices, and the question is, shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to increase the filing fees for candidates seeking city elected offices from the current fee of $20 for each office to $500 for the office of mayor, $250 for the office of council member, $100 for the office of Board of Estimate and Taxation member, and $100 for the office of Park and Recreation commissioner, and, as an alternative to payment of a filing fee, allow a candidate to submit a petition of voter signatures as provided in state law.
All right, so we have a proposal about the language on changing the filing fee. I will say that I like the fact that the question educates the voter that they have, per state law, alternatives to either paying a fee or, as has always been the case, getting petition signatures in order to freely be on the ballot. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to move approval of this item for discussion purposes and see if my colleagues have any comments or questions on this item. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? And that item is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Carl. Next, we have what we are calling federal, state, and regional updates. And I'm going to invite Mr. Ranieri, who heads our Intergovernmental Relations Department, to introduce some special speakers that we have with us today.
Madam Chair, members, thank you very much. Every year we ask our Washington representatives who represent the city in Washington, D.C. to come and give us an update on what the issues they're working on and what's happening in Congress. We're fortunate to have two firms who also have roots here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. Mr. Dennis McGran represents Lockridge Grindle, and will be talking to us about transportation and aviation. And then Ted Bristol and others will be talking to us about what's happening in areas of large-scale economic development, community development. Where is the federal government and Congress going in that whole area? So, Madam Chair, both gentlemen have PowerPoints, and I would ask Mr. McGran to come up and start.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. McGran.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the council. It's a true honor to be back in this great city again. As Mr. Ranieri pointed out, I'm with the firm Lockridge Grindle Nowen, and we've had the honor of representing the city in Washington for many years. Mr. Ranieri asked me to be brief and to cover a number of issues that have been high priorities for the city with respect to transportation. So with no further ado, I will get on to that. First up is the principal issue is the Surface Transportation Bill. This is the bill that the authorization, the federal highway bill we commonly refer to, but it funds all transit, bridge replacements, surface roads, everything related, we think, of highway bills and transit in America. This authorization, this law expires on September 30th, 2014. So by the end of September, if it's not enacted or extended, the federal government's authority to fund projects will cease. It's my full expectation that will not happen. There's a lot of pressure on Congress to try to do a full 6-year bill, and that's playing out I'll speak to that as we move along. In May of this year, the Senate passed its extension of this bill. It's a full authorization, full funding at the current levels, and the House has been relatively slow to act on this. The chairman of the committee, Chairman Schuster from Pennsylvania, has indicated he will take the bill up, but he has yet not done that. They have not brought the bill before the committee. I just want to say, as I move through this, obviously, if there are any questions at any time, please interrupt me so that I keep this as informal and informative as possible. If there's any loss as to why we need a highway bill, I mean, that's very clear. You know, the White House just came out with a major policy announcement on transportation, and there's 4 million miles in this country that are funded through federal highway dollars, 600,000 bridges. It's pretty clear that the federal government has a major role in transportation. In Minneapolis alone, if you look back over the years, just most recent history, we just had we had the Green Line, or the Central Light Rail Corridor from downtown Minneapolis to St. Paul opening up. That was $480 million of federal money came into that project. A number of years ago, we worked closely with the chairman of the committee, Jim Obastar from Minnesota, was chairman of the House Transportation Committee, and Mr. Obastar designated $25 million to Minneapolis, specifically for bikeways and alternative modes of transportation within the city. Moving on, there was the Nicollet Central streetcar project was a beneficiary of over came through with $900,000 in a grant to begin the alternative analysis of that project. And the UPA program, which is a federal program, designated millions of dollars, over $100 million, to Minneapolis for high-speed busways, which we see moving through Minneapolis right now, and that project will continue on. So there's obvious reasons why we're concerned about it. It's, as I said, expired. Excuse me, I should move this. Yeah. Here we go. There we go. Most recently, we're facing another calamity in that the Highway Trust Fund. The Highway Trust Fund is what the federal gas tax goes into. The Highway Trust Fund is the principal funding mechanism for federal transit and highway programs in America. That program is suffering a shortfall. That is to say that as a result of increased efficiencies in vehicles, less utilization of gas in this country, the trust fund is short. That is, it's not able to sustain the commitments the federal government's made. So we're facing, at the end of this month, they're currently facing about an $11 billion shortfall in that program. The House has passed a bill to fund that if you read the morning paper in the Minneapolis Tribune this way, you'll see that there was a very critical analysis of the House action on that, but it does fund the program through May of next year. The Senate is scheduled to take that up. They indicated when I actually put this together they were going to do it this week. Well, now that has moved to next week, which is, I think, part of a strategic move on the part of the Senate. There's more interest in the Senate in trying to get the whole bill, that is the whole 6-year program, done this year and not allowing it to go on into 2015. And so there's an effort afoot among Senator Barbara Boxer from California, Senator Tom Carper from Delaware, and Bob Corker from Tennessee to try to force the Senate into a short-term funding so that they can actually keep the pressure on for a full bill in what we expect to be a lame duck session right after the election. On another front, Mr. Ranieri asked us to look at the number of critical bridges in the city and what are some of the options available in terms of funding that. There is no dedicated program in the federal government for bridge funding, although there are separate programs that do offer pathways to possible funding. The Tiger program, which is a number of projects in the city, have been funded through the Tiger Grant program, which is part of the Obama administration's priority for designating specific projects and being able to fund high priority projects around the country. The TIFIA program, which is a loan program, a credit-based program, which is also being used around the country, has not been used in Minnesota. but it's been used in a lot of other places, and essentially it advance funds projects which are paid off later through a dedicated funding stream. The EDA, Economic Development Administration, is quite flexible in funding and availability, and that the fact of the matter is that there could be prospects through EDA grants as well. The state allocated federal programs through the STIP, which is through the state of Minnesota, and that fundamentally we really think that this is an issue that the city ought to be we should be more active on federally as we look to redo this bill, in light of the fact that Minneapolis is not the only city in the country that faces these kind of challenges with critical infrastructure, bridges, facing real needs. Moving on to the aviation front, it's been a very high priority for the city for a number of years. The Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA's authority to be in business, expires next year. So this is another waiting issue that will be way on the hands of Congress. A number of issues that the city has been very active on. One is a thing we call this CAT-X2 or a categorical exclusion. The last time they did the aviation bill, there was a provision that was inserted in the dark of night, actually, and without any real review, that without getting into the weeds on exactly what it does, it excludes projects from a thorough environmental review, and it handicaps cities' ability to have input into the process when you look at the impacts of aviation on a community. Minneapolis fought that. We continue to fight that pathway. We've worked with over the last 2 years with the FAA and trying to reduce the impact of this. We are pretty confident that the groundwork has been laid that when we redo this bill, that will not be in the next bill that's being done. So that works. And finally, on RNAV, which is the term used to describe the issues related to the implementation of the new GPS-based guidance system for aviation in America, Minneapolis is probably the leading city in the United States to advocate for a seat at the table and an opportunity to allow cities a chance to be heard, to be considered, and have input in the decisions that affect their communities. We could go on for hours in terms of what Minneapolis has done, but no city in the country has been more successful in claiming credit or being able to slow down the FAA and to say we need to have a seat at the table in order to make sure that decisions that are made that affect our citizens, city is adequately represented in that process. And I give great credit to the council and to the community at large, because no city has done a better job than Minneapolis has in terms of that issue. Along that front, the city is also one of the founding members of an affiliate, NOISE, is an affiliate of the National League of Cities. Councilmember Quincy serves currently as the vice president of that organization, and the city has had a leadership position nationally through the League of Cities in that since the inception of the organization nearly 40 years ago. In addition to that, over the last 10 years, the city took no city in the country can claim more credit than Minneapolis for establishing the most advanced aviation environmental research entity in the world. It's called the Partner. It's a center of excellence at the FAA that has directed over $130 million in funding towards environmental research affecting both the air and also the noise issues around this country. And so Minneapolis was advocated for that. Former Congressman Martin Sabo heard that message and laid the groundwork for pathways by dedicating funding through the FAA to create that organization. So that has led to a lot of advancement along the line. In addition, the city's been very involved in the FAA, advocating at the FAA for a new analysis of the impacts of noise on communities. And so the FAA has asked us to participate in a program. They are going to update their noise structures that haven't been looked at in 20 years. And the FAA is undertaking a process that the city's advocated for. In addition to that, I already talked about we talked about RNAV, or what's called PBN, and performance-based navigation. The city has been invited and is part to a implementation of what we call best practices. That is what can be done to make sure that cities and airports and the stakeholders in the aviation community take a good look at this, and how can we do it in a more efficient and effective manner. And then finally, the city has been we've been routinely asked to participate and be part of what's called the Next Gen Advisory Committee, which is overseeing the entire remake of the U.S. of aviation airspace in the United States. So Minneapolis has been, without a question, the leading city in the country on these issues. And that's it. I thank you. If there are any questions along any of these lines on any aspects of transportation, I'm more than happy. But trying to adhere to Mr. Ranieri's instructions, I want to keep it short.
And thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your expertise. We do have a question from Council President Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. McGran. This whole rail, what would you call it, uptick in traffic coming through our state in particular,
Right.
and cities. What are we? How are we monitoring that and the challenges that is giving us these days?
Railroads are under federal statute are much like aviation. I mean that there's a inherent inequity for cities in dealing with railroads, and I'm sure that if you had that experience, you understand that. There are a number of areas, though, where we can have an impact, and one is the administration just U.S. DOT yesterday announced a regulatory plan that's going to require that in the case, for example, of oil tankers, have to meet new stringent standards to hopefully prevent or to mitigate what we've seen to be these disasters across the country where rail cars have exploded and caused all sorts of calamities. But in terms of the rail surface and the transportation, it is a real challenge. I mean, that is because railroads have the right to move through, but we should be advocating all the way along to make sure that cities do have a representation and have an opportunity to weigh in on it, because it is a critical issue, and it factors in. I mean, this issue is across the country, particularly relative to the explosion, if you will, in the oil tankers, and in terms of the amount of utilization. Mm-hmm. There are a number of cities that have real serious concerns with respect to that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Ranieri's got him.
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Ranieri.
Council President Johnson, during the 2014 session here in Minnesota, Representative Hornstein championed legislation that increased the number of safety inspectors in our state and set up a whole process of contact and information communication with the railroads when there is a spill or a disaster, time frames they have to do, things working with our emergency management folks. But the feds can control things like the age of the tank cars and type of tank cars, which we don't do. So the federal, I think, in terms of equipment and other things is important. But here in Minnesota, we've started doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to say just a special thank you. I do think that the airport issues have been maybe surprisingly a little bit of a win for Minneapolis and some of our other surrounding communities. A lot of the things that were in your presentation seem like these, or they are, I should say, these big intractable issues where we're at the mercy of some higher power that never can agree or meet. So I really appreciate your expertise in helping us through many of these issues, and really we appreciate, and in particular, your continued advocacy on the airport issues, which is one part of your portfolio, I know, but a very important one to us, and one that makes people's eyes glaze over until they realize the impacts of not engaging. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to congratulate you and your colleagues, because none of that would happen without the commitment of council members like yourselves and others who stand up and fight for that, because it is not easy, but you can win. You can be successful. Small steps lead
Thank
the
you.
way.
It's an important message. So, Mr. Ranieri.
One last thing for Mr. McGran. He met yesterday with Mr. Kotke from Public Works to talk about the bridge issue, and will be getting to us a report on some ideas, at least for federal activities.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next will be the folks from Fagery BD. Ted Bristol will lead the conversation, and I think he has some staff he'll introduce.
All right, wonderful. Mr. Bristol.
Oh, sure.
Just give us a moment. I don't want to give Dennis's
Not a problem.
presentation all over.
Just hit this now.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting us out here today. I'm here with my colleague, Bina Patel, who's going to co-present with me, as well as my colleague, David Gogol, who will help answer questions as we go along. I think it's really appropriate time to have this discussion. You're finished with the state legislative session, which I know was all-consuming for you, and we have new mayor, new members of the committee, and significant changes going on in how Washington is doing its business. And that's really where I wanted to begin here. We're here to talk about really what's the role, what the status of the federal-local partnership, and how we should be looking at it, how the city should be looking at it, how we're looking at it, and how we think about it, particularly in the next 2 years. So, really, what does the federal-local partnership look like now? How should local governments be engaging with the federal government? And the question that's really on all our minds, and we read about all the time, is the federal government still relevant? And how is it relevant? And in particular, we're looking at a situation with congressional gridlock, no more earmarks, and budget cuts. All of those have been, for legislation, as Dennis was just talking about with the MAP 21 legislation, highway transportation legislation. We can't move those bills which provide critical funding for cities on a timely basis. It really puts a lot of stress on you. And it's really, how do we then face that challenge, and how do we go forward together? So this is a harsher looking slide than it maybe is intended to be, and we don't mean to say that Congress is irrelevant, but we have a situation where Congress, maybe with a big C, capital C, is really been challenged. So it's easy to be down on a legislative body. However, this legislative body really is reflecting the polarization in the country, and it's designed to perform in a way that the checks and balances the way it is, but it's incredibly frustrating. And we have a situation now where we have a Congress that's passed the least number of bills into law in modern history. We have a situation where we have a situation where all major decisions are being pushed over until after the election. We've been pushing decisions over until the next election on a regular basis now for several cycles, and we continue to do that. What it means now is, and we all heard this in the President's State of the Union address, which is that the administrative branch and the executive branch are moving forward increasingly independently, and because Congress isn't able to enact legislation they're not able to partner together. So what we have is, instead of the executive branch and the congressional branch partnering, we really have the president going out on point and passing through, using his powers to move initiatives on his own. So what does this mean for Minneapolis? So Minneapolis has remarkable local strengths that I think are unique to many cities in the United States. You have an extraordinary congressional delegation which is in sync with the city, and the delegation are in sync with each other's priorities. You have a record here of successful programs, federal programs, and you have programs which match the priorities of the White House. And so if in a construct where the administration is moving forward on its own agenda while Congress is kind of locked up, you are in a strong position to partner with an administration that's looking to try to come up with successes with a much more limited budget. And so what have we seen in the last 6 months especially? But we're seeing a president who is increasingly using executive order to advances initiatives. So we saw it in the carbon emissions regulations. We were talking about it in immigration reform, mental health coverage related to the gun disasters that happened up in Newtown, Connecticut, and others. And we're also seeing a more creative use of the federal cabinet and federal agencies. So in a time with less money available, the federal agencies they're looking across budgets and across agencies to try to come up with programs drawing from multiple sources of funding to advance administrative initiatives. So what that means is, instead, when you have a budget that's contracting in one agency and you're trying to put forward an initiative, they're looking to try to say, well, we can borrow from here, and we work together and go forward on that. So we talked about the matchup between administration priorities and Minneapolis priorities. And so this chart here is a quick walkthrough that talks about the areas where there's really strong overlap, and why that's the overlap creates the real opportunity for when to work in Washington to try to highlight federal programs, and also to take advantage of the administration's search for successes when they put federal money and the limited federal funding into programs. So what I want to do now is I'm going to have Bina come up to talk about more of the federal grants, community and economic development, and the racial and income disparity issues that the city is looking at and how they might partner.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So what does all this mean, or how does it manifest itself, you're probably asking? So for federal grants, you all know that there's a new normal. Without earmarks, it means that all of the funding is funneled through competitive grants. And as Ted talked about, the administration has been really successful of taking their priorities and creating new initiatives and new grants around it in absence of congressional action. Although overall there is a smaller pot of funding, so it means that these competitive grants are highly competitive, and they're really looking at communities that are leveraging local and regional investments and partnerships. Well, all this also makes it really hard, the competitive process, or the application process, really hard. So it's extremely difficult to come up with a competitive application from the time that the announcement is released and the 30, 60, 90 days that you have to submit an application. And so it really takes communities that are looking long-term and, say, looking at the next 2 years and trying to figure out where the priorities are and where we're going to invest our time and resources. So an example of this new normal is the Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative, which is a multi-agency effort that's focused on focused on concentrated poverty. And the NRI is really an umbrella for 4 programs, which are the Strong Cities and Strong Communities, the Promise Zones, Choice Neighborhoods, and the Bryce Criminal Justice Innovation Program. And they emphasize all the things you're going to see in these multi-agency grant programs from the administration, so strong local and regional partnerships, breaking down local silos, but I wanted to talk specifically within the NRI about the Promise Zones. Now, the Promise Zones designation essentially is within the NRI, and it allows the administration to work with communities that are at the forefront of revitalization strategies. But of course, there's not specific funding designated for the Promise Zones. It's a highly competitive, and the application process is cumbersome. So any sane person would ask, why on earth are you actually talking about it then? But I think the answer is there's 2 reasons. One is that Promise Zone designees do get preferred access in other competitive federal grant programs, including the BURN, which I know the city has applied to. And second, that the administration really likes to work with winners. So they like to work with communities that they know are successful, they know are governed well, and they know that they'll be able to partner with in the future. And so this are really just within the community development, economic development context. These are some of the new development opportunities that we heard of. This list is not extensive or exhaustive, but we just wanted to put these up here to kind of think about how we want to use federal resources to help move these forward, and how to think about them in the context that we've just described. And now I'm going to switch a little bit away from economic development and community development to racial equity and reducing disparities, which we know is another important issue for the city that also dovetails with the administration priorities. And there are a few administration priorities that are new in the last year or so. And I know some of you are probably already aware of them, so I'll run over them quickly. But the first is the trade Adjustment Assistance Community College and Career Training Grants Program. It was launched earlier in May, and the applications were due in July, and it's essentially looking for communities that are creating partnerships between community colleges and industry. And I know the city has applied as a workforce development partner on 2 applications, one with North Hennepin Community College and the other with South Central College. The American Apprenticeship Program was also announced earlier this summer. It's expected to be launched in the fall, and it's similar to the TAA program, except it'll be focused specifically on apprenticeship programs. And the third is the My Brother's Keeper initiative. It focuses on reducing disparities amongst minority youth. A task force was formed back in May, and they released a report about 90 days later. There is $300 million in private funding that's been pledged. It says $200 million, but there was an additional $100 million that was announced earlier this week, and the PowerPoint doesn't reflect that. But of course, this is also another initiative that there is no specific federal funding attached to it, but we wanted to highlight this as kind of a perfect example. This is where, if we're thinking about a Venn diagram, this is really important to the city, and it's also an administration priority, so you'd find it right there in the middle. And so it's really a meaty area as we're looking on what to focus on in the next 2 years. It's ripe for a federal partnership. I think I'm going to let Ted finish up.
So in conclusion, I think what I think we're looking at is Congress may be at its high water mark now in terms of what we're going to see in the next 2 years. So it's not a happy picture, but I think it's a realistic picture. We have a midterm election coming up. The Senate is hanging in the balance whether it's going to remain Democratic controlled or Republican or move over to Republican majority. And if that happens, I think we're going to look at 2 years of the administration and Congress just locked up, getting ready for another presidential election. So from the city's perspective, what does that mean? What should we be doing with some of the initiatives we've talked about and others that you may be sharing with us as we go along? It's critical, I think, to stay focused on what you do and what you do well. And so you need to match your goals with what the administration goals are. And as I said, we think they're highly aligned. We want to make sure that we look for ways to partner with your delegation, which is, as I said, it's really it may sound like I'm playing to the preaching to the choir here, but it's not the case with every city and every city that we work with. This is really a remarkably strong relationship that's a real advantage for you, and also that you match up so well with the administration. But to work with them to engage the administration and advocate your reforms. And I think we want to show that what you're already doing, and with the programs that Bina was outlining, that Minneapolis has a reputation as a problem solver and a strong federal partner. And we saw this, it was a year and a half ago when the city was working very hard to become part of the National Youth Violence Task Force and was able to be added to that group. And one of the reasons it was added was because the city was recognized as a leader, so they really wanted the city to be a partner with the other cities that were really struggling to sort of just help show the way forward. So I think that model is a good model for us to continue to think about and to look for ways to connect as closely as we can with these initiatives. And so I'd we'll welcome any questions you have, and thank you again for the opportunity to meet with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the sobering and realistic presentation. And, this something that I think we're all really struggling with as this goes on from, year to year to year is how to make headway with our federal partners. I was interested that some things that, I perceived as used to be on the list as administration priorities were not on your, maybe it's just, I know you're trying to be really focused in your presentation. So one that has come up before is this issue with healthy food. And of course, that's Mrs. Obama's, initiative as well. But there have been some administration interest, but I don't know that I've ever seen that much of how it's developed into budget priorities or programs that we've ended up being able to be successful in figuring out the funding partnership, perhaps. Wonder if you could comment on that.
You're absolutely right that that is a federal partnership. That is an area of intersection. You're also right that it was a representative list, not the complete list. And then as far as the funding opportunities go, as you know, Congress did move a farm bill last year, sign it into law, and there are opportunities there that I think we can explore further for how the city might be able to take advantage of those federal resources. And I know it's something we've talked about, and Jean may have more you want to say about it.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri.
Madam Chair, we did have a position in our federal agenda dealing with the Healthy Food Initiative of the administration. A legislator, a congressman from Cleveland, Ohio, actually pushed the legislation for the urban agricultural program. She was able to get a $250 million authorization in the Farm Bill. Now the Department of Agriculture is doing some listening sessions and will be developing guidelines on that program. What we'll do is provide some dollars for grocery stores, urban farming, things of that nature. But it was an effort of urban legislators who got it done. And Congressman Fudge is from Ohio, and she's been on the I committee for about a long time, and she's sort of the urban woman on the committee. The first person who was chair of that was Shirley Chisholm from New York.
So I have another question, I think, for Mr. Bristol, just because one of the things that we're thinking about in the city that I think mirrors the experience of a lot of other units of government throughout the state and the state itself is how we're looking at preparing for a workforce. We used to say tomorrow, and it's like here now, So in the next 5 to 10 years, we will have significant turnover within our city enterprise, maybe as much as a third. I think department to department it varies a bit, but that's a lot of employees to look at replacing. We're thinking at the same time about, what does it mean to do a better job in diversifying our workforce, but also how are we making sure that our workforce is able to match up with people with the right skills and abilities and how to create those pipelines. How does that experience match up to what's happening with federal employment? And is the federal government thinking about any particular programs to address this issue of boomer retirement and changing demographics nationwide and how we work on workforce readiness as serves government employers?
Madam Chairman, I'm going to have my colleague David Gogol talk about that. He's done a lot more on job training than I have.
Thank you, Council Chairman. As you're completely correct, there's a mismatch between our old job training programs and the new realities, both of underemployment, the long-term unemployed, and the retirements. You may have seen that Vice President Biden has announced a number of changes in policy, but now we're trying to figure out what those actually are going to mean in specifics. One of the things that we're going to pay a lot of attention to is a little bit of the mismatch between city government role in job training and the workforce investment boards and how that balance happens. Those are often, there's been a lack of coordination, I think, in some communities. One of the other pieces that's been important is there's been a lot of underspending of job training dollars because the job training dollars have been provided in high amounts, but in structurally difficult ways for communities to take advantage of them. And the kinds of projects that you all would like to advance have been very difficult to move. And so we're about to see a whole big change in this, and one of the areas of bipartisan agreement in Congress is changes to the Workforce Investment Act, and we expect that to actually maybe make some progress this year. So the administration, as Ted and Bina talked about, is doing some things administratively today or over the next several months to change that relationship and how the programs are structured. But they're limited under the legislation as to how much they can do. The next stage will be legislation that will, I think, fundamentally change. Historically, about every 15 years, we've seen major changes in unemployment work or job training strategies. If you're old enough to remember CETA and some of the other ones, we're about to hit another one of those, and it'll cause all of us to rethink how we're doing job training, and I think it's the right time.
Well, thank you for that. I just wonder if there may be some partnerships that develop as we're kind of going through some of the same struggles, I think. So.
Well, your existing relationships between the community colleges and the city, which are very strong here, is clearly the direction the administration is going. Again, is you all seem to be, it's as if you are doing some kind of mind meld or something with the administration in terms of how well you all are thinking independently, and the administration is responding in their own way towards many of the same issues that you're working on.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing other questions from council members. I just do my last look around here. So I think what our action is just to receive and file these presentations. And so I will make that motion. All in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. And thank you all very much for being here and sharing your expertise with us. And we very much appreciate the FaceTime. Thank you. Next, we have an update on regional policy. And Mr. Ranieri, or I'm not sure how you want to introduce this, but
Madam Chair, Lauren Olson will make the presentation and talk about what's happening at the regional level, particularly at the Metropolitan Council.
Sorry, a couple small technical changes since our run through on that. Good afternoon, everyone, Madam Chair, council members. I'm Lauren Olson, Government Relations Representative. I just wanted to give you an update today on what's going on with the Met Council. As you know, the Metropolitan Council is in the middle of a very important planning process. Every 10 years, the Met Council is required to review their regional plan, and so that really sets a vision for what the growth of the region is going to be. We talked about this back in May, and the Thrive MSP 2040 plan was adopted by the Met Council back in May. So that is just the beginning of a process that's going to have implications for the city of Minneapolis. So what I'd like to do today is just kind of preview for you where we are with that process, where it's going. We're going to not plan to delve into the policy issues right now, but just kind of prepare you for what's coming. So as I said, Thrive MSP was adopted in May, and the next step is to review the policy plans that the Met Council has and update them for consistency with Thrive. So all of this has been moving quite quickly. We'll delve into the details, but like the housing policy plan, for example, the draft is already out as of yesterday. So we went pretty quickly from adopting a plan for the region to getting into the details of each of these policy plans. So what you see on this slide is just the date by which the Met Council hopes to be complete with the process and actually have each of these plans adopted. And what will happen after that process is that the Met Council issues system statements to each community that basically applies these policies to each city and gives guidance for how they think we need to adjust to these policies, and when we do our comprehensive planning process, how to make sure we're consistent with that vision. Those system statements will be issued in fall of 2015. When we receive the system statement, that triggers a 3-year time period for us to complete our comprehensive plan for the city of Minneapolis. Oops. So I want to spend a little bit of time just telling you about 2 plans that are coming up pretty quickly here. The housing policy plan, as I said, the draft of it was actually adopted yesterday, and that starts a 60-day time period for us to give formal comment. The housing policy plan is a little bit different from some of the other things that are considered formal systems of the Met Council. So it's not required to be updated on a regular basis, and it hasn't been updated for quite a long time. So this is a significant undertaking to look at the housing policies again. The role of the Met Council in housing policy is that they administer a voucher program for Section 8. They also help distribute a lot of federal funding sources to help with brownfield development, TOD or transit-oriented development, influencing and encouraging mixed-use development and affordable housing in in those developments. The Met Council's role also in determining where wastewater services go is also related, kind of interrelated, because it affects land use and density planning. That doesn't really affect Minneapolis so much, but for other communities, there's density requirements before they'll be extended certain services. So when you consider transit as well, it all kind of relates and it affects land use. So just to give you an idea of the schedule now, it should be clear that the dates on here for potential city council action are not firm, and I should have been more clear about that. But I did want to present, because this is all moving very quickly, where this discussion might go as far as committees and what the timeline realistically may need to be. So again, those dates aren't firm, but we would expect that that would be the time frame in mid-September where we'd have to take a formal action. So in the meantime, of course, we want to have discussions with all of you about your interest in these policies, and we already have staff that are following these plans as they've been going along and that are going to be preparing a review and response. So again, the draft came out yesterday, and we hope to bring it to you formally in mid-September. Are there any questions about the housing plan before we move forward?
Where do you get it on their side?
All right. Well, the transportation policy plan is going to be the next one up, and as you can imagine, that's a very robust document. I think that you're all pretty familiar with the role of the Met Council when it comes to transportation, and certainly transit services, running Metro Transit, as well as running the suburban services as well. The Met Council also has to make an assessment about the general needs of the region in terms of whether we have enough room for cars, whether we have enough highway investment for the future. So big part of the transportation policy is assessing the current and future needs and what is going to lead to healthy growth of the region. And also, the transportation policy plan acknowledges those things that are in the works as far as identified projects and what could be done if more money was available as well. I would call your attention probably to the bottom bullet here. It gives you an idea of the direction that that the staff was given about how this transportation policy plan should be different. Their priorities are better stewardship of resources, recognizing that we are in a time of limited resources. Prosperity and equity for all residents is very much part of the one of the themes of Thrive, and livable communities that can be developed and maintained into the future, or sustainability. So the
No questions.
Okay.
I think we can just move on to the next, yeah.
Okay, let's keep
Okay.
moving along, yep. So the transportation policy plan is expected to be adopted on August 13th. And yes, that's very soon. And again, here's a rough idea of what committees we think this could go to and what timeline it realistically may need to go through to be completed in a timely way to submit comment by October 1st. One thing that's nice about the TPP is that it has been going through a number of processes already where we have representation. Parts of the TPP draft have been going to the Transportation Advisory Board, and Councilmember Reich is on the tab, as well as Councilmember Benders are alternate to the tab. And there's also some subcommittees where we have city staff. So this is a process we've been able to be engaged in along the way, and that's been a nice thing about this work. So on this one, there's actually a second slide. And basically, this just shows you that even after we submit our formal comment, there's going to be a lot more conversation that happens, including at the tab, before that's finalized. So the other plan that's being developed and that's not as well developed at this point relates to regional parks. One of the Met Council's charges really with regional parks is to keep an eye out for opportunities for acquisition to really grow our regional park system. Regional parks includes parks that are operated by cities, counties, and park boards. So there's 10 different entities which operate parks within that system, including Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. So that plan is also expected at the end of August, possibly. We are also planning to review that. We are working with staff from the park board in that process. And the fourth plan would be Water Resources Policy Plan. So the Met Council's role in water resources is that they have a role in making sure that the water quality of lakes and rivers is good. They test the quality of lakes. They share a permit with us for discharging water into the river. As you know, they also run our wastewater treatment facilities, or at least one. They also are responsible for trying to help us with best practices when it comes to surface water management. And the issue of water supply is a growing concern, and there's some debate ongoing about the appropriate exact role for the Met Council on water supply, but it is recognized as a issue of regional significance that is certainly important for the future. So again, they're hoping to get that by end of August or early September, and then the comment period. So we will know more detail about that later, but we don't know a whole lot about that right now.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we have one question from Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, Lauren, is real quick. What's the Met Council's role in reviewing the long-term comprehensive plan at the airport?
It's the job of the Met Council to assess the needs of the region for transportation, and that includes aviation. So it is their job to determine whether the system of airports in the region adequately meets the needs that we have now and into the future. They do review major, plans of the airports and their major capital expenditures as well throughout the years. When it comes to like the TPP, their role is to assess whether we have enough and appropriate resources. Essentially, the approach they seem to have taken with the TPP is to say this system that we have now serves the needs of the region, in their opinion, and they kind of incorporate the long-term comprehensive plan almost with the assumption that they almost adopt what the airports have come up with as far as long-term plans.
Okay, that helps me. I just wanted to make sure that the Met Council still has an approval of the MAC long-term comprehensive plan. And that's part of the TPP, or is it just really roads?
That would be a separate
transit
process.
Okay.
The TPP is more about a general assessment. Now, if they had a disagreement with the airport about whether their long-term vision of the airport was, misguided or needed to go in a different direction, the TPP is a time when they should recognize that and identify the needs.
Okay. Thank you. And I just had one follow-up question, if I may, Madam Chair, just about the water supply issues. I've obviously reviewed the CLIC process, and as we're shaping the budget, and we're talking about a backup water supply. Mm-hmm. Is that part of the Met Council's responsibility, or is that just individual municipalities?
That is still an ongoing debate, and that's something a lot of communities are trying to get clarity on because there's a lot of different levels of government that touch water supply issues. You probably saw even in the news recently, there was certainly a discussion about how to ensure that Northeast part of the region, and White Bear Lake, gets enough resources there. So there, as far as, and the debate about whether Minneapolis can get another source of water is a debate that happens at the Met Council. I don't know if that quite answered your question, sir. Okay.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, actually my question goes to this water issue too. I want us to be really, when their plan comes out or however we have the option to assert ourselves in that or insert ourselves in that plan. Today's article you referenced about White Bear Lake, it's a crisis there, obviously, but it's the same dynamic that's going on, in a smaller way in our part of the region. And, the solution to the problem in the most reasonable way is to use the Mississippi River for drinking water and, not continue this practice of wells and all that sort of thing. So. Right. And we have excess capacity, just like the article said about St. Paul today. So, I think it would be to our advantage to be really forceful in asserting ourselves in that mix.
Thank you for that.
All right. I'm not seeing any further questions, so I'll move to receive and file this report. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate it. Next item is... There's my agenda. Next item is a staff direction to convene what I guess we have called the Disparities and Opportunities Work Group. Just to give a little background on this, the Senate has established what they call a Senate Select Committee. It is modeled off of a House Select Committee that Ryan Winkler was involved with last year that toured around issues of poverty. This Senate Select Committee is co-chaired by two Minneapolis senators, Senator Hayden and Senator Champion, and they want the committee to focus on economic opportunity and employment issues that are impacted by racial disparities, and they're calling their committee Disparities and Opportunities. We do not know yet what might be a more House companion to this, but we are waiting and just want to be ready for the opportunity. So this would pull together a staff team along with policymakers to work together on what might be state legislative items that could be potentially put together as a package. And we would also want to work with some of our regional partners to make sure our ideas are aligned with theirs. So this direction, which is recommended by IGR staff, is that staff of the IGR department shall convene a working group of city council members, staff of the mayor's office, and city departments, and they list several, to develop as part of the city's 2015 legislative agenda proposals that focus on policies that are intended to reduce racial disparities and provide opportunities in employment and economic development. The work group should complete its work by the end of 2014. And I think we would anticipate that the work group would include myself and Committee Vice Chair Councilmember Cano, but there is opportunity for others who are interested. So I would encourage you to maybe contact me if you would like to be involved in this work. And I will move then approval of this staff direction. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, on approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And thank you for that. And finally, we did have on our postponed agenda the federal agenda, and we, upon discussion, staff has requested some additional time to continue to work on the proposals in that federal agenda for our review. So we will continue to postpone this on our agenda, and so I will move to postpone again one more cycle, and so that motion is before us. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And with that, I believe we have concluded with our business for today, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.